Hi, I'm Bons Magsambol, and this is Rappler Talk. A year into the pandemic, schools in the country remain closed. How has been the government implementing the distance learning system? Joining us today is Reg Sabal and James Miradora of Aral, Pilipinas. Hi, Reg and James. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Bonds. Thank
Hi,
you for having
Bons.
us.
It's a pleasure. And thank you very much for inviting Aral Pilipinas to this particular Rappler session.
Okay, siguro before we go into the discussion, maybe you can tell our viewers or introduce ano yung ginagawa ng Aral Pilipinas.
Siguro, Aral Pilipinas is a broad coalition of like-minded advocates. We are parents, teachers, learners, educations, and other advocates who are always lobbying for education. We are also joined by other sectors from health, finance, social development and welfare, and transport sector and other sectors, which believe in the need to support education continuity and the welfare of learners. So we've had a lot of initiatives on this, no? Even before the pandemic, we've been working towards looking for reforms and best practices and ways to help learners amidst disasters. It has always been centered on looking for field experiences and different perspectives. And this actually led us to have certain kamustahan sessions with teachers, learners, and parents. And getting this input no in the beginning of the pandemic, this led us, our group, to lobby for additional support for learning materials and modules and the necessary budget, or rather to prioritize the needed budget in support of learning modality, particularly in the production of modules which parents have selected prior to the pandemic to be prioritized. So we also have other initiatives that have worked together, so I'll call James.
Thank you, Reg. No? So, ang current thrust ngayon ng Aral Pilipinas Bonds is to advocate for a comprehensive and multi-sectoral approach when you speak of safe reopening of schools. Kasi narinig natin that there have been sentiments coming from the parents na mahirap yung blended learning. So some of them are calling for a gradual reopening of schools. And when we say comprehensive and multi-sectoral, we mean na starting from the moment na paggising ng bata sa bahay, pagpunta, pagbiyahe sa schools, habang nasa school siya at pagbalik, the safety and health should be ensured. And it should be multi-sectoral because we agree no, to the Department of Education that it should be a shared responsibility na hindi lang ito issue na edukasyon but on transport, health, and and the support from the local communities is much needed on this undertaking.
Okay. So yun basically yun yung ginagawa ng Aral Pilipinas. They have been advocating for safe reopening of schools amid the pandemic. So yeah, so let's go into the discussion. A year into the pandemic, schools remain closed. Why do you think is that?
Siguro let's look at it in a different no. So as we look at the current situation of education, we're in the midst of something new. It's something na hindi pa naranasan natin o kahit na ibang bansa in this particular scenario, no. And at we see it, we've been a year into this, and we saw that even in the beginning, no, um, the Department of Education even naglatag ng iba't ibang modalities because they're trying to look for ways to support the diversity of learners and the different content what you call this, the different kind of learners and situations and context. But of course, sadly, we also feel that that has also limited our um, delivery to exclude no face to face. Alam naman natin that there are risks that come with it, but and then also there are mga fears of health and safety, but we also have to look into sabi nga we commend that the Department of Education really tries to look into ways to resolve these concerns, but also way into it, we could have gotten by Aral Pilipinas efforts also to get different perspectives from the ground, no. Kasi iba yung lente ng DepEd, iba yung lente din ng parents, and the parents teachers a year into this have also been sharing their experiences of difficulties, of challenges, and we know na hindi lang ano no na parang we have turned around our education system to just make adjustments and continuous yung movement no nung the things that are happening, and we try to look for ways also reflect on number one also there are certain learners who did not enroll for this school year no. We also try to look in what now is the condition of our ALS or alternative learning students, and then we also try to look into the other um, marginalized sectors no in the pandemic no, dahil marami din ito, kaya nga maraming mga magulang din ang nagsi-share na hindi din pantay-pantay yung ano kasi yung how they are able to cope with these educational changes. In before the pandemic there's already a disparity or a gap. So that other challenge is the pandemic in a lot of ways has also widened that gap. So all of us, I mean, not just the government, ano, but also all other stakeholders, as mentioned by James, should be involved really in making sure that education will work. We also reflect into what has happened in the year and what worked and what didn't work and how can we still further improve this. Kasi as we said,
Yeah.
no, we try to look at different lenses and we try to respect that our experiences, sabi natin, our feelings are valid. So the feelings of our parents, our learners towards this pandemic and how they are learning and how they are being a part of learning is also valid. James?
Yeah. Yeah, just to add briefly on that, no, Bonds, definitely at the outset, no, there were challenges, but this is also the reality in other sectors and countries as well. So yung pag-shift to online learning, yung added cost, no, may it be on the part of the government, families, no, so there are added costs talaga. But in my perspective, Bonds, no, a year after distance learning, I believe we have seen and learned enough from our experience, and this actually presents us a number of opportunities to improve the situation of our learners. So at this point, no, we have to talk about the resumption for the next school year, coming August. So as early as now, we have to prepare. Um, if we will gradually start with pilot implementation of face-to-face in low-risk areas and gradually reopen schools. And apart from that, no, we have to start thinking about na rin how the education budget would look like in the next school year. So we have to assume na COVID-19 will be a long-term issue. So paano yung magiging itsura ng schools natin, ng school facilities? Are we going to hire more teachers if we aim for smaller class sizes? So ito no. So at this point, we have to think about these things in the overall goal of ensuring learning continuity and the safety of our learners and teachers.
Okay, thank you for that. Like you mentioned about, of course, health should be the top priority when it comes to reopening schools. Pero this pandemic still untamed pa rin siya. Like we've been recording I mean, thousands of cases. And on Monday, if like for example, we recorded a record high of 8,019 COVID-19 infections. So yeah, so with that, how would you assess the implementation of distance learning system for the past year? Kasi, for example, Department of Education has reported that 99% of students have passed during the first quarter. Is that even possible? Kasi there have been reports or anecdotes of parents, of teachers na nahihirapan sila mismo with the distance learning setup. Pero yun nga, merong report ng DepEd na nilabas na 99% yung nakapasa. So our students are na nakakapag-aral ba talaga ang mga estudyante natin or may natutunan ba sila on this kind of setup? Siguro Miss
Yeah.
Reg muna.
Yeah, Nanay James, sorry James, ako daw eh. Going into this, no, iba-iba kasi yung metrics na ginagamit for learning. The number that was generated by DepEd was based on a number of past students based on reports of their respective regions. So of course, maraming factors. Of course, for us, no, it might sound na a lot may pass, but your issue on what is there really a significant learning happening, which is also kind of something that a lot of people are asking. Dun sa metrics na yun, kasi iba yung, first of all, reduce ang learning competencies for this year, no? From the original na competencies that are listed. So there are lesser things that you measure. Then the next concern also that we want to also try to see, no, the actual anecdotes or experiences from the ground. Kasi we also hearing, no, from parents now that's why Aral Pilipinas tries to gather these inputs also, and is to share this with other stakeholders and even to the Department of Education then na merong mga narratives na yung parents no nahihirapan din dun sa modality, and the learners, the teachers, and then also add to that may mga ito yung running joke namin na parang merong mga teachers na nagsasabi na yung mga valedictorian at saka yung mga tag dito mga mahilig sa take 2, mga part 2 ng grade level, no? Biglang naging valedictorian or top ng class nila for this year. So that also poses, though it's a joke, no, but sometimes we try to take it a little bit more seriously na are we really measuring an effective the learning? Because as an educator also, you also realize na learning is not just about what you think and what you say, di ba? Yung parang yung hindi lang siya na may measure ng written test, but you also have to measure other things in the child's development. Like, yun yung parang hinahanap natin, kaya Aral Pilipinas was lobbying also for remote learning in support of DepEd's proposal as well. Na part of learning is not only what you think, what you learn here, no? It's also your actions, it's also your behaviors, diba? It's also your morals, it's also your physical development. So we recognize that there are also other aspects of learning, and we might be looking, remote learning allows us to focus on one side of learning and development, but we should not forget that there are other aspects of a child or a learner's development that should also be given equal emphasis on. And perhaps the challenge for that, in all fairness to the Department of Education, they're really trying to gather the data, but they're also reliant also on the inputs that come from the ground. And at the pandemic, the challenge really, not just for them, but for everyone, is to be able to gather those insights. Kasi limited our movements are limited. Our ability to go physically and gather significant feedback becomes limited as well. So that's why sometimes it really helps that we're able to air out our particular concerns, and of course in that let's try to also reflect that let's not just only look at the learner at this particular situation. Let's also look at the teachers who should also be given priority as well. And then because we are talking about the learners, anything that happens to them impacts the home. Kasi kung hirap yung bata, hirap din ang magulang na magturo. And the reality is the limitation in face-to-face learning has also in so many ways reflected upon what we call learning loss. So we have lost a lot of opportunities to provide experiences to our children, to develop a lot of other skills other than, of course, knowledge in this particular pandemic. James, you want to also add to that?
Yeah. One way of looking at it, Bonds, no, is the level of participation ng students. Whether students actually learn is, I think, another question, no. But based on the recent reports ni DepEd and what you cited as well, yung around 99% students passed the previous quarter. I think this is a good start, no, since ang primary objective naman of implementing distance learning is to keep our learners engaged and at the very least, no, for them to learn the most essential learning competencies. So this is to address yung slide that we call, no, if we will have no classes or if we will stop classes at all. So part ng Aral Pilipinas Coalition are the health professionals and pediatricians, and they said na if we will have 1 year of completely no school or classes at all, it's equivalent to 2 years of learning loss. No, so distance learning is a good mitigating measure for that. But again, no, there's no substitute to face-to-face education. We can compare naman din distance learning to face-to-face education no, since it's comparing apples to oranges. But again, no, in this regard, that's why we support the Department of Education. In At this point, no, we have to start talking about how to safely reopen schools. No, magsimula tayo sa mga low risk areas, no, kasi we recognize naman yung surge ng cases ngayon. But definitely there are areas where we can reopen yung areas na mababa ang cases ng COVID-19 or zero, no, even. And yung support then from the communities are very much, no, local governments are supportive to the Department of Education in this regard.
Okay. So yeah, you mentioned about like there's no better alternative to face classes din talaga, and you briefly discussed about it's better than implementing an academic freeze, 'di ba? Parang better na mag-study pa rin yung mga bata at home kaysa ma-freeze totally yung education. So yeah, so let's go into the discussion about calls for face-to-face classes. There have been calls for face-to-face classes since late last year. And then marami din talagang discussion about it. Like, sobrang, may mga arguments about ready ba yung mga schools natin, paano natin i-ready given na yung mga parents mismo takot sila na palabasin yung mga anak nila, ano yung mga kailangang paghahanda ng DepEd, for example, or ng government when it comes to safely reopening of schools. So one question, are our schools ready for this? Are our schools ready for the face-to-face classes during the pandemic?
Yeah. Sa point mo, Bonds, no, valid talaga yung fear, no, for the learners to return to schools, even teachers, no. But yun nga, we have to assume that COVID-19 will be a long-term issue. We are also aware that there are schools, no, na walang access to water, no, to clean water. And pero it will be difficult for these schools, no, to implement health standards kung wala silang access to water, no. Pero Bonds, we are also aware na itong schools na to are also those schools na nasa far-flung areas, yung mga nasa low-income municipalities. Kaya I think we should not let this be a hindrance, no, for these schools to reopen. That's why we call for a comprehensive and multi-sectoral approach to safe reopening. And by that, we mean it should be a shared responsibility. So again, hindi lang ito dapat responsibility ni DepEd, pero support from key agencies is much needed. No? So halimbawa, support from the DOH, DILG, Department of Transportation, and of course, yung support from the local communities like yung local LGUs, no, yung pag-monitor ni local health office for the implementation of health standards and yung pag-monitor or ano yung may contingency measures mo kung magkaroon ng surge man if in case we reopen schools.
Okay.
So, ano
Siguro
din,
for me,
let's try to
Red,
look. Yeah, let's try to look at it in another way, no? Parang ako kasi parang as James did mention, we have been lobbying really to follow a framework that supports the learner through safe school, safe communities, safe school, and then safe transport. Kasi ano a lot of the limitation really for opening is really a fear for health and safety, which is alleviated by increasing cases right now. But as James mentioned, and as we have been emphasizing, the schools right now and the different localities have different contexts and different situations. We have areas that are far flung, remote, isolated, almost isolated islands, and then yung mga nasa bundok na sobrang na remote na, ang way lang for the kids to go there is really walk and then cross yung crossing to a boat yung ating yung island. So those are just examples of extreme cases where we want to really look at how to safely reopen schools. In reality, there is no 100% way to be ready. Diba? Sabi nga ni James, we are really advocating for the health and sanitation, health, safety, sanitation procedures to be really put in place to reduce those risks for schools who will be considered for the pilot. That's why we have Aral Pilipinas is really supporting for piloting, carefully selecting the schools through the DepEd initiative to pilot and safely reopen schools in some areas. But the challenge is really though we know there is no 100% way to prepare for this, we must always exert all our efforts to support, prepare, and provide assistance to the selected schools and to the learners who will be part of any face-to-face way or rather initiative of opening the schools. And it really involves multiple sectors that have to work together to ensure the health, safety, and security of our learners, their parents, their families, and the teachers. We are really looking for, if you are, as we mentioned earlier, the framework that we have been lobbying for is to have this parang, yung safe school, safe home, safe transport, and then safe community, which ensures that the learner is protected and supported from home to school and back. And parang ang description natin dyan, di ba? Parang kasi home di ba? Parang bahay. Di ba? 4 na walls yan eh. If you don't have safe transport or mobility, or you don't have the safe home as a component of this particular framework, then it is bound to really parang you open yourself to higher risks. That's why we are all saying that diba, it takes a village to raise a child. But it takes a community and an entire nation to educate a child. And we really have to provide all that support. And we cannot just only look into one sector, but we have to look in all sectors and all stakeholders that are involved in ensuring safe, secure, and healthy environment for our learners, whether or not it's in the home for the remote learning or in a face-to-face modality for the areas, okay, very particular, for the areas who really need it. Kasi sabi nga ni James, madalas yung hindi pa, how do you safely do remote learning in an area that has no internet? Tapos very little mobility, very little no? So parang you have already isolated them further in terms of education. So really, we had to look into this context. No single solution fits all the scenarios, but we really have to really engage everyone, the transport, LGU, the schools, the communities, the parents, and other stakeholders in making these decisions and making sure that the safeguards are observed, followed, and supported to ensure not just the safety but also learning and to maximize learning despite certain limitations of the pandemic.
Okay. Siguro, you mentioned during our past meetings before na parang yung nangyayari kasi President Duterte has been turning down proposal of the Department of Education and even lawmakers and several groups about the resumption of face-to-face classes. So, bali nagkakaroon kasi ng blanket rule and top-down management when it comes to policies like this. And in return, yung mga schools naman na hindi ganun talaga kadelikado in a way na nadadamay kasi nga may blanket rule. So can you elaborate more on that and give us an idea, tell our viewers kung ano yung parang risk with that kind of policy na blanket rule talaga na parang hindi binibigyan ng autonomy yung certain, for example, local communities na may gano'n namang capability to open. But then since nga merong ganito tayong isang rule or isang policy, pati sila kahit capable, hindi din pwede magbukas.
Siguro yung as mentioned, if we reflect a year after the lockdown has imposed, our neighbors have partially reopened, whether it's a nationwide opening or a localized or opening or selected areas. No? But this particular siguro sa ating situation, mas diverse yung ating conditions in the country. Really the challenge for that is that, first of all, different areas have different resources. We have different internet connectivity. We have different, our local government units have a different, although we have a national budget for education, our local government units have differentiated a supplemental budget to education through their SE. That's why even yung isang initiative nga ng Aral Pilipinas was really education financing kasi we need to really look into the areas who have a little bit limit in terms of what budget they can dispense for the support of education. So and we realize that the ones who are not so much with technology, not so much with these parang support systems. Sila yung mas maliit yung budget nila, no, for education. So by doing a blanket issuance, you are trying to forget that we are not naman forget, but we're trying to kind of overlook the situation that our schools, our learners have different capabilities and conditions. And as much as we really want to support them, no, sabi nga natin, hindi siya one size fits all model. So, parang nga sabi nga, as a teacher, di ba? Ako as a teacher, if I have a student, I will have to understand each of the students and look at their condition and try to look for ways to support them based on their differences. So it's also like what we're experiencing now, no? The school should also, or rather, we should also consider the different situations that the schools have. Kasi by giving a single solution, di ba? Parang we might be forgetting what are the other challenges that these particular learners have, no, and their families, as well as the particular localities. And especially kung hindi natin mabigay yung support like modules or learning materials, mas nililimitahan natin yung opportunities and learning resources that they need to really maximize hindi ma-maximize talaga learning, but to maximize the opportunity in this particular scenario.
Okay. Siguro for my next question, yeah, we mentioned na ito na nga, we discussed about ito yung mga naging problems during the past, during the implementation of the distance learning for the past year, ano yung mga gaps na kailangang gawin, at the same time, ano yung mga dapat natin gawin when it comes to safely reopening of schools. So yeah, so nandun na tayo na parang your group has been pushing for safely reopening of schools. But what do you think the government should be focusing on in preparation for that face-to-face classes? Kasi we're not saying naman na, okay, magpe-face-to-face classes na tayo tomorrow or next week, di ba? That's not how naman yung push ng group nyo. Pero sa tingin nyo, ano dapat yung pinagpo-focus ng government when it comes to opening of face-to-face classes? Siguro for James muna, then we'll go to Miss Red.
Yes, thank you, Bons, no? Siguro unang point is we have to prioritize yung targeting or selection ng schools and areas kung saan tayo mag-reopen. So, we advocate na it should be a risk-based approach, no? So, hindi lang siya basta identification of number of cases in the area, but also yung capacities at the local level to respond to surge of cases. Pangalawa, again, no, let me reiterate na it should be a shared responsibility. So the government should harness the support coming from the other sectors, no, from the private sector, from the civil society, on how we can comprehensively safely reopen schools. And then lastly, siguro on communications, kasi at the end of the day, it will be the parents, no, and their families that will decide if they are um, comfortable for their children to return to schools. So I think we have to prioritize communicating with parents the importance of having a clear targeting guidelines kung saan tayo mag-reopen and ano yung mga safeguards, no, para rin sila makampante na okay then for them for their children to return to schools kasi na-acknowledge din naman ng ilan sa mga families natin yung difficulty ng blended learning. So yung added cost, yung pag-support ng guardians or parents sa homeschooling, mahirap din na i-sustain siya for a longer period of time. So again, yung selection ng schools and then yung pag-harness ng support from other actors and syempre yung communication. Reg.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Ano lang, no? Parang let's just also put emphasis on it na as we select the schools, identify and provide for them support, we also have to give a certain level of autonomy, no? Not just for decision making, but for crafting customized or contextualized guidelines, especially for the reopening as we support the schools, no? Dapat it's one would be sending off a clear, consistent message, no? Ano bang health and safety protocols that we want to follow, and then what we also practice and implement. And we have to also give solutions that are, that are consistent, that are well communicated, and then they are also contextualized, no, that to be able to fully support, no, not just in the selection of the schools, but also once they are allowed to reopen, that we are hindi dun sa selection, but we still engage the different stakeholders into really providing the support. And then hindi din natapos dun sa implementation, but also coming for the next level of continuously monitoring and evaluating the entire process. Because as mentioned nga natin, ano, at parang isang realization, COVID will not be solved in perhaps in a month or in a week. It might take a little bit longer than that. And we also realize that COVID may not be the only thing that we may be worried about in the future, di ba? With what has been happening all around the world, this particular health days, COVID might pass, but maybe there might, wag naman sana, no? Pero what if there is another situation that involves it? At least we are more ready for this. But we have to recognize that, ayun, it's very important to look at experiences, anecdotes, the data that comes from the field, from the ground, and for especially from those who will be concerned about it. And yun nga, yung assurance lang natin sa parents is that parents should always be given, and the family should always be given a choice. Even before the pandemic, parents have this choice, di ba? Pag, yun nga, sabi na, pag may sakit ang anak, decision mo kung papapasok. So, minsan kung masakit, nagsabing masakit ang ulo, it's your decision to send your child off to school. So, that option should never be taken away from our parents and from learners. No? If they feel that kulang yung ano, no, they can still opt for contingencies or alternatives pa rin to a face-to-face modality na dapat available din siya na kung sakaling hindi may pangamba pa rin yung magulang or may high risk sa bahay, ayaw niya mag face-to-face, dapat accorded pa rin yung opportunity to select another remote learning modality for our learners and our parents.
Okay. Siguro for yung next discussion natin is about yun nga, the pandemic is still dragging on and the possibility of another year of distance learning is still there. 'Di ba? So, yeah, given na nakaranas na tayo ng a year of distance learning, ano sa tingin niyo yung dapat pagtuunan ng pansin natin in case na distance learning pa rin tayo in the next school year? Siguro Miss
And,
Red or Jill?
yun po, sana ano din, continued reflecting on our experiences. We may not have enough as much, no, kasi katulad nga no, nasabi nga na we try to also look at the best practices or experiences of our other countries in terms of how they safely reopened schools, no, and how we would be able to gather. We should have a system also for gathering data, feedback, and experiences also. And I think there's also, other than certain mechanism, we have to engage the entire different stakeholders or other different sectors in this particular thing. No. At very important, as we have been really lobbying for a framework for safe reopening of schools. And we also emphasize it's not just a framework that you follow during the pandemic. It's a framework that has to be always supported this in other conditions. That the government should always look at how to put together these initiatives, kasi meron ng initiatives ang ating health sector, our mobility and transport, merong efforts ang TR, Department of Transportation, ang DOH, and DepEd also has their own initiatives. I think the better way right now is really looking for na we can best work together, no, government, non-government, civil service society, and even the households, for them to be able to be brought together, having a uniform message, a consistent way to send off, or rather how to communicate, and how to we consistently implement these things, and how we can really rally the support of different stakeholders in providing the safe school, safe home, safe community, and safe transfer, where the learner would be at the center, and where the teachers will also be at this particular center, because we all know that we cannot we cannot wait for this pandemic to really and we have to always continue to realize that we cannot fall back in terms of investing in our children, in our learners. The greatest investment of any country is its people. And in this particular pandemic, we cannot afford further na increasing this learning loss. So we really have to look for ways na ito yung kumbaga sa bahay, no, when you budget for something. Parang kaya kami nag-lobby before ng support or prioritization ng budget for education, because we realize that pag nag-budget ka sa isang bahay, pagtutuunan mo ng pansin at ang inuuna mo yung pinakamahalaga. And right now, we realize that our learners as the human capital investment of the nation, and of course, as very important individuals, have to be given priority. So we do not scrimp on this. We do not compromise them. We have to give priority for this in terms of budget, of support, and looking for best solutions and alternative solutions to be able to either safely reopen schools or continue to provide alternative and remote learning strategies that will best work for any scenario in any particular situation and condition, because we have different contexts, we have different learners, and we have different challenges. So the best that we can do is really work together, bring together the best of all sectors to be able to support and give assistance to our learners, our schools, and our teachers.
Yeah, just to briefly add, Bonds, no, we agree na um, there's a possibility that we will continue remote learning considering na may surge pa rin ng cases, no. But it should not be a blanket policy that for the entire country, no, will be subject to remote learning, especially if we know that there are areas and municipalities that can safely reopen. So una, at this point, no, we have to start talking about selecting areas and schools na pwedeng mag-reopen safely. Pangalawa, we have to continue the support for teachers, for learners and their parents, no, on how to sustain yung blended learning. So ensuring na there would be no added cost, no, added cost to blended learning, yung burden or yung workload, considering na we're still in the middle of the pandemic, no. So I think these we've had enough experience and lessons that can um, properly inform us and develop strategies for a more effective and sustainable blended learning approach in the next school year.
Okay. Siguro to wrap up our discussion now, what is your group's message to the government, to the student, and to the students and to the parents? Miss Reg muna, and then we'll go to James.
Ako ina James Good. Kailangan na. And then siguro to the government, first and foremost, Aral Pilipinas really supports the initiatives of DepEd to really look into solutions to be able to, or in its proposals, no, to really pilot face-to-face and look for other opportunities to support our learner amidst the pandemic. We support the call really to look into which schools to safely reopen and to ensure that the safeguards are in place, no, before they open, and assistance, due assistance is given to them in a multi-sectoral um, approach, no. So ano naman po yan, parang hindi dapat tayo lahat nagtutulungan sa pandemya na ito, no. We have to offer solutions to certain and problem, kasi hindi naman ito competition ng mga sectors eh. This is a chance for our sectors to come together and rally in support of our greatest asset, which is our children. And then siguro, message sa teacher din, magpa-props na ako dito. Yan, so siguro nakaka-sad face po ang naranasan natin ngayon kasi sobrang challenging po ng learning. And this is also the reaction of a lot of parents and learners because remote learning is not easy and a lot of change has been pero sometimes nakakawaw din po ang effort ng ating mga magulang at learners and their determination to really survive in this particular pandemic. Nakakagalit lang minsan kasi minsan bukod sa maintang ulo ng parents, minsan dahil nag-work from home na siya, nagtuturo pa siya, nakakagalit din sa iba na parang hindi nag-i-improve ang ating COVID situation. But we realize that COVID is, we cannot do anything about the transmission except to probably stay home, follow health protocols. So we just try to realize that at this particular pandemic, let's try to look for ways that we can smile and look for ways that we can all be productive, di ba? Let's try to look for ways that tayo mismo we can contribute something. Kasi ayan, we may not like our situation, but we have to realize that we should look for ways that we can be able to like ourselves, and whatever we can do. And of course, wala akong care, but I have love. Di ba? Parang our parents and our learners should continue to, teachers should continue to love what we do. It's challenging, but this is something we chose. And for our parents, we will never have lost love for our kids. So no matter how hard it is, alam natin, alam ko, fellow parents, no, kahit gaano kahirap, we will give sacrifice for all our kids. So let's continue to support our children in this pandemic. And of course, let's, for our teachers to also continue to love kahit minsan it's challenging. Let's continue to love our, ano. And then for our parents, uling paalala, because mental health is also a concern today. Let's try to support each other, and let's also realize our challenges and difficulties, but realize that remote learning is a challenge, but this is not the end all for learning. So let's continue to help each other. Let's continue to be one. Di ba? Parang help each other. Parang kayo, Rappler, move PH. Let's move together. And then, let's move towards providing a safe community, safe home, safe transport, and safe school for our learners and our teachers. Take it away, James.
Yeah, sa akin brief lang, no. In the coalition, no, let's not allow COVID-19 pandemic to further disrupt our education system. We've known enough the economic and learning impact of a negative impact, no, of a prolonged school closure and prolonged distance learning to education and in our learners, no. So education really cannot wait. At this point, we have to harness all efforts, no. And one is Aral Pilipinas, no. Our group is in support with the government, especially the Department of Education, in ensuring learning continuity and ensuring the safety and health of our learners should we reopen schools, no, in the next school year. So siguro yun lang, no. Thank you, Bonds and Rappler, for having us in
Thank
this
you.
conversation.
Pa-plug din po kami. Please like, support our Aral Pilipinas Facebook page. Yeah, po. If you want, you can also try to join our FB group for updates. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. Basta po, just send us a message in our FB page. So let's all be one in uh, forming a broader coalition to support our learners and to support education continuity.
Ayun.
Thank you
So
again.
so ayun, despite the challenges of despite the challenges that the education sector is facing during the pandemic, we're ending this conversation on a positive note, right? So that's it for today's episode of Rappler Talk. Follow us on Rappler.com for continuing updates on the education sector during the pandemic. I'm Bons Magsambol, and this has been Rappler Talk.